In the autumn of 1995, two highly experienced climbers, 42-year-old Josh Brown and 43-year-old David Clark, vanished without a trace from the sheer granite face of Yosemite's El Capitan. They were on the second day of a meticulously planned three-day expedition, a vertical camping trip that involved sleeping on a specialized platform known as a portaledge, suspended thousands of feet in the air. Their plan was precise, their gear was top of the line, and their confidence was absolute, born from years of shared ascents on some of the world's most formidable rock faces. David's girlfriend, Sarah, was expecting a call from them on Sunday evening. A simple check-in to confirm they were off the wall and heading home, their voices likely buzzing with the triumphant energy of a successful climb. The call never came. When Monday morning arrived with a profound and unnerving silence, a silence that felt heavier than the granite monolith itself, the alarm was raised. What followed was one of the most extensive and ultimately heartbreaking search and rescue operations in the park's storied history. For weeks, rangers and volunteers scoured the immense landscape, their bright jackets tiny specks against the unforgiving stone. Helicopters crisscrossed the sky, their rotors beating a desperate rhythm against the canyon walls, while expert climbers rappelled down countless sections of the face, their ropes looking like fragile threads against the mountain's scale. They found nothing. No rope, no stray piece of gear, no shred of fabric, and no sign of the distinctive gray portaledge that had been their temporary home in the sky. The granite walls of Yosemite, which had witnessed their final ascent, offered no clues and kept their secrets. The men were presumed to have met a tragic, unknown end, their story absorbed into the mountain's mythology. For 12 long years, their fate became another ghost story whispered among the climbing community, a somber cautionary tale of how even the most prepared, the most skilled, can be swallowed by the mountain's immense and unforgiving indifference. The case grew cold, a thick file of dead ends and unanswered questions stored away in a metal cabinet in the park's records office. Then, in the summer of 2007, a routine patrol helicopter, flying a geological survey route in a remote and rarely scrutinized section of the park, spotted something that had remained hidden in plain sight. A discovery was made that would pry open the frozen case, revealing a scene suspended in time, a silent, weathered testament to a final, desperate moment that had waited more than a decade to be understood. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The call came in on a Tuesday, a day so ordinary it felt undeserving of the jolt that would redefine its place in Park Ranger Ben Carter's memory. Ben was at his desk, the scent of pine, old paper, and stale coffee a permanent fixture in his small, cluttered office. He was a man shaped by the park, his face a testament to years spent under the California sun, his eyes holding the quiet, steady gaze of someone who understood the profound power and the stoic indifference of the natural world. He'd been a rookie back in 1995, a fresh-faced ranger full of procedural knowledge but little real experience with the kind of soul-crushing, ambiguous mystery that the Brown and Clark disappearance had become. He remembered the energy of that initial search, the frenetic, almost frantic hope that slowly eroded with each passing day, each empty grid square, each fruitless helicopter sortie. It had been his first taste of a true wilderness enigma, one that didn't end with a clear resolution, but simply faded into a void of unanswered questions. The case had settled deep within him, a piece of unfinished business, a quiet failure that he carried with a professional solemnity. He'd known climbers like them, had seen that specific fire in their eyes, a blend of profound respect for the rock and an unshakable belief in their own ability to conquer it. The fact that two men of their caliber, with their level of experience and meticulous planning, could simply evaporate had always felt wrong, a narrative with a missing final chapter, a puzzle with a piece too large to ignore. The voice on the radio belonged to a young pilot named Marcus, usually calm and methodical in his transmissions. But today his voice was clipped, laced with an undercurrent of disbelief that cut through the static. Yosemite Command, this is Chopper 7-4. We're on the standard geological survey route over the southeast face. We have a visual on something, unexpected. There was a pause, filled with the rhythmic whump 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 of the rotor blades, a sound that seemed to stretch time. Command, it looks like a portal edge. An old one. It's still anchored to the wall. It's in a really remote, overhung section, tucked into an alcove. I don't think anyone's seen this before. It's been here a long time. Ben felt a cold stillness spread through his chest, a sensation like ice water seeping into his veins. A portal edge. He grabbed a pen, his hands suddenly slick with sweat, his knuckles white. 7 to 4? Can you confirm the location? Give me GPS coordinates. And Marcus, he added, his voice low and even, consciously fighting to keep the sudden surge of adrenaline from cracking it. I need you to get as close as you safely can. I need detailed photographs. Everything you can see. High resolution. From every possible angle. Do not, I repeat, do not disturb the site. As the coordinates came through, a string of numbers that felt electric, Ben was already pulling a large topographical map from a deep drawer, his movements precise and automatic. He unrolled it across his desk, the paper crinkling with age. He plotted the point, his finger tracing the complex, jagged lines of El Capitan. The location was brutal, a section of the wall known for its challenging overhangs and unpredictable wind shears. It was technically within the 1995 search area, but it was on the extreme periphery, a place where a visual from the air could be easily obscured by the shifting play of light and shadow on the immense granite canvas, a natural camouflage that had evidently worked perfectly for over a decade. Within the hour, Ben had formally reopened the 1995 case file for Josh Brown and David Clark. The file itself felt like a relic, its cardboard cover softened with age, the pages inside yellowed and smelling of dust and time. Opening it felt like disturbing a grave. It was a document of faded hope, a catalog of frustration. He spread the contents across his desk, search grids marked with red X's, interview transcripts with family and friends, detailed equipment lists, and grainy photographs of the two missing men. In one, they stood together at the base of a different cliff, ropes slung over their shoulders, their faces lit with the pure, unadulterated joy of their shared passion. Josh, with a wild mane of dark hair and a wide, almost reckless grin, was the dreamer, the artist. David, standing slightly behind him, had a calmer, more grounded presence, his smile more reserved but no less genuine. He was the planner, the architect, the anchor to Josh's soaring ambition. They were a perfectly balanced team, and by all accounts, their friendship was the bedrock of their climbing partnership, a bond forged in adversity and trust. As Ben sifted through the old reports, the memories of 1995 came flooding back not as historical data, but as visceral feelings. He remembered the desperate, pleading expression on the face of David's girlfriend, Sarah, as she sat in this very office, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she never drank, its warmth doing nothing to combat the chill that had settled. Deep in her bones, he remembered her voice, trembling but firm, as she insisted that they wouldn't have made a simple, fatal mistake. David is meticulous, she had said, her words recorded in the faded blue ink of the original report. Ben, read them again, her voice echoing in the quiet office. He checks everything 3 times. The anchors, the ropes, the weather reports. He double-checks Josh's knots even though he knows Josh is just as careful. It's just who he is. Josh trusts him completely. They trust each other. If something happened, it wasn't carelessness. It was something else. Something they couldn't have seen coming. Her words had been a passionate plea for belief in the men she loved, a defense of their legacy against the easy, often lazy assumption of human error that so often follows such tragedies. For 12 years, her statement had been an unanswered question hanging in the cold, thin air of the high Sierras, a testament to a faith that had no evidence to support it. Now, with the impossible discovery of the camp, Ben felt a profound, almost crushing obligation to find the answer she deserved. The investigation couldn't just be about the new evidence found on the cliff face. It had to start with the lives they had lived before their final climb, to understand the meticulousness that had, somehow, failed them. That Ben's first call was to a number he found deep within the file, listed under next of kin for David Clark. He fully expected it to be disconnected, a digital ghost from another era, a dead end before he even began. He dialed it with a sense of formality, of process, but after 4 rings, a woman's voice answered, hesitant and cautious. Hello. It was Sarah. Her voice was different now, the youthful tremor of 1995 replaced by a quiet weariness, a tone layered with the complexities of a life lived, but it was unmistakably her. Ben introduced himself carefully, explaining his position as a park ranger and the reason for his call, choosing his words with deliberate softness. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line, a silence that felt weighted with 12 years of grief, of birthdays uncelebrated, of conversations unfinished, of unresolved questions that had likely echoed in her mind every single day. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, a fragile thing. They found it. After all this time, they found the camp. She agreed to meet with him the following day, her tone a chaotic mixture of shock, dread, and a fragile, flickering hope for the one thing she had been denied for so long: closure. The next morning, Ben drove out of the park and into the small town of Mariposa, where Sarah now lived. He found her in a modest house with a garden full of vibrant, chaotic wildflowers, a stark contrast to the unforgiving, monochrome granite that had defined so much of her past. She had aged, as they all had, but her eyes were still the same, clear and intelligent, though now shadowed by a deep, settled sorrow that seemed a permanent part of her. She had made tea, and as she handed him a mug, her hands were steady, a small act of composure in the face of a seismic emotional shift. For the first hour, they talked about the intervening years, a necessary preamble to revisiting the wound. She had eventually moved on, had married a kind man and raised a family, building a new life on the foundations of the old one. But the ghost of David Clark and the mystery that surrounded him had never truly left her. It was, she explained, the not knowing that had been the most corrosive part of the grief. The endless loop of possibilities, from a sudden, catastrophic fall to the wild, desperate hope that they had somehow survived and were living off the grid, a fantasy she knew was impossible but clung to in her darkest, loneliest moments. You mourn them, but you can't bury them, she said, her gaze distant, fixed on a point somewhere beyond the garden wall. A piece of you is always waiting, always scanning the horizon, listening for a phone call, hoping for an answer that never comes. It's like living with a door left open that you can never, ever close. With gentle prompting from Ben, who listened more than he spoke, she began to paint a vivid, breathing portrait of David and Josh. She retrieved a heavy photo album from a bookshelf, its pages filled with images of their adventures. It felt like opening a time capsule. There they were, covered in desert dust in Joshua Tree, grinning through snow-caked beards in the Alps, and standing arm in arm in their shared workshop, a chaotic but organized space where they built and repaired their own specialized equipment. David, she confirmed, was an architect by trade, a man who saw the world in terms of structure, balance, and integrity. His designs were celebrated for their clean lines and flawless execution, a philosophy he applied to every aspect of his life, especially climbing. He never took a risk he hadn't calculated 100 times over, Sarah recalled, her finger tracing the edge of a photograph of him meticulously checking a line of anchors on a practice wall. He used to say the mountain decides if you get to the top, but you decide if you get to come home. Preparation was his religion. He would spend weeks planning a climb that would only take a few days. The planning was part of the joy for him. Josh, in stark contrast, was a landscape photographer. He saw the world not in lines and angles, but in light and shadow, in emotion and ephemeral beauty. His work was wild, dramatic, and full of a raw, untamed energy that captured the spirit of the wilderness. While David planned the route with mathematical precision, Josh was the one who saw its soul, who dreamed of the images he would capture from a perspective few humans would ever witness. They were two halves of a whole, Sarah explained, a sad, nostalgic smile touching her lips. David provided the structure, the safety net, that allowed Josh's artistic spirit to soar. And Josh gave David a reason to look beyond the technical challenge and see the art in it. They argued sometimes, of course, mostly about how much gear to bring. Josh always wanted to pack more camera equipment, another lens, another tripod, and David would meticulously weigh every single item, grumbling about every extra ounce. She paused, turning a page. But on the wall, they moved like one person. There was a trust between them that was absolute, complete. It was the most profound friendship I've ever witnessed. She then retrieved a small wooden box from a closet, a chest that held the most sacred artifacts of her former life. Inside were letters David had sent her from expeditions around the world, and, most importantly for Ben's investigation, his climbing journals. She handed one to Ben, the one dedicated to their Yosemite plans. It was a thick, leather-bound book, its pages filled with David's precise, architectural handwriting. It was a log of their training regimen, their gear preparations, and their detailed plans for the El Capitan trip. Ben felt a professional reverence as he turned the pages. He read through entries detailing their choice of route, a lesser-traveled, but spectacular line on the southeast face. He saw intricate sketches of the portaledge setup, load distribution calculations, lists of emergency supplies, and notes on expected weather patterns based on years of almanac data. It was, just as Sarah had described, a testament to an almost obsessive, yet deeply reassuring, level of preparation. There was one entry, written just 2 days before they left, that caught Ben's breath. "Josh is buzzing," David had written. "He thinks the light from this angle in the late afternoon will be transcendent. He's been talking about this one photo for years. My job is to make sure we have the safest possible platform for him to get it. Checked all the anchor cams and load-bearing straps again today. Everything is perfect. Ready to go." As Ben drove back to Yosemite that afternoon, the weight of the case felt heavier, more personal. These were no longer just names in a cold file. They were David the architect and Josh the artist, two men bound by a deep, symbiotic friendship and a shared passion, who had approached their final climb with the utmost care and respect. The discovery of their meticulously kept journal only deepened the central, nagging question that now consumed him. If their preparation was so flawless, so exhaustive, what could have possibly gone so wrong? Back in his office, he pinned the high-resolution photographs from the helicopter onto a large corkboard, creating a grim mosaic. The portaledge was a tattered gray rectangle against the immense, ancient granite, a fragile human artifact clinging defiantly to the void. It looked forlorn, a ghost ship stranded on a vertical sea of stone. It held the answers, he knew, but it was in a place that was nearly as inaccessible as the moon. Getting to it would require an operation as carefully planned as the one David Clark himself had designed 12 years earlier. The next phase of the investigation began with a series of tense, logistical meetings. Ben assembled a core team, a group that included Liam, the grizzled, no-nonsense head of Yosemite's search and rescue, YOSAR, and a young, prodigiously talented climber named Alex, whose knowledge of modern climbing systems and high-angle recovery was unparalleled. Liam, a contemporary of Ben's, remembered the 1995 search with a painful clarity. He had been one of the lead climbers on the ground, and the failure to find any trace of the men had been a professional wound that had never fully healed. "We searched that whole damn area, Ben," he said, his thick finger hovering over the map where Ben had marked the coordinates. His voice was low and gravelly. "We rappelled the main lines. We glassed it from every conceivable angle. If they were there, we should have seen them. I was there myself." This was the first major puzzle of the new investigation, the discrepancy between the thoroughness of the original search and the undeniable evidence now hanging on the cliff face. Ben pulled out the old aerial photographs from 1995, spreading them across the table. They were grainy, taken from a distance that flattened the cliff's immense complexity, but they showed the vast, architectural chaos of the southeast face. The team pored over them, comparing them to the new, high-definition images from Marcus's helicopter. The location of the portaledge was in a deep, recessed alcove, shadowed by a massive overhang known to climbers as the Great Roof. "From directly above, you'd see nothing," Alex observed, pointing to the topography on the map. "The overhang would completely block the view. It creates a ceiling. And from the ground, or from the valley floor, the angle is too extreme. The ledge is set back too far. It's tucked away in a perfect blind spot." Liam nodded slowly, a look of dawning, frustrated comprehension on his face. "We were searching for them on the primary faces, the more logical placements for a camp. This spot, it's audacious. It's not where you'd expect a team to set up for a multi-day stay unless they were specifically seeking shelter from a storm or something else. The conversation turned to the formidable challenge of reaching the ledge. It was not a simple matter of rappelling down from the summit. The massive overhang made a direct descent impossible. The team would have to ascend from below, following what they presumed was Brown and Clark's original route, a challenging climb in its own right, and then perform a difficult and highly technical traverse to get into the alcove. It would be a dangerous, multi-day operation, requiring a team of at least 4 elite climbers carrying specialized gear. "This is a recovery, not a rescue," Liam stated, his voice grim and authoritative, setting the tone for the entire operation. "The scene has been there for 12 years. It's a potential biohazard, and it's certainly unstable after all that time exposed to the elements. We treat it like a crime scene. Nothing is touched until it's been fully documented from every possible angle." Alex began to sketch out a possible ascent plan, his pen flying across a notepad as he detailed the types of protection they would need, the complex rope systems required for the traverse, and the contingencies for bad weather, rockfall, or equipment failure. The complexity of the task was daunting, a high-stakes mission in its own right. Ben felt a growing sense of urgency, a need to get his team up there before wind or weather could further degrade the site, but he also felt the heavy responsibility of sending men into a situation fraught with its own dangers. While the Yosar team meticulously planned their ascent, Ben focused on the human element, trying to fill in the gaps in the story. He reached out to Josh Brown's family. His wife had passed away a few years after the disappearance, a tragedy friends said was hastened by a broken heart. But he had a son, Ethan, who had been a teenager in 1995 and was now a man in his late 20s. Ben found him living in Oregon, working as a carpenter. The call was difficult, dredging up a profound loss that Ethan had learned to live with but had never fully processed. Like Sarah, he was stunned that the camp had been found. He agreed to speak with Ben, his voice thick with a mixture of old pain and new, cautious curiosity. He told Ben about his father's relentless passion, his infectious energy, and his artistic obsession with capturing the perfect photograph. That trip was everything to him, Ethan said, his voice quiet over the phone. He called it his El Capitan masterpiece. He'd been planning it with David for over 2 years. He wasn't a daredevil, no matter what people thought. He was an artist, and the risks he took were for his art. But he trusted David with his life. Implicitly, he always said David was the only one who could get him to the places his camera needed to be. Ben also tracked down the retired search commander from 1995, a man named Frank Gillespie. Frank was living in a quiet retirement community in Arizona, far from the mountains that had defined his long career. Over the phone, his voice was gravelly, but his memory was sharp and clear. He listened intently as Ben described the location of the discovered camp in the alcove. "An alcove, you say? Under the great roof." Frank cursed softly, a sound of pure professional frustration. "We glassed that area for days. But if the light wasn't just right, if you weren't at the exact right angle, damn, it's possible we missed it. The scale of that place, son, it plays tricks on you. Your eyes can't comprehend the size of it all. You think you're looking at a small crack, and it turns out to be a fissure 100 feet deep." Frank spoke of the immense frustration of the search, the feeling of being overwhelmed by the sheer vertical mileage of the cliff, a landscape too large for human systems to fully conquer. "We did everything by the book," he insisted, a defensive edge creeping into his voice, the old wound of the failure still sensitive. "But the book doesn't account for a team setting up in a place that defies climbing logic. Why would they camp there? It's out of the way, exposed to the crosswinds from the valley. It doesn't make sense as a primary campsite." Frank's words echoed in Ben's mind. It doesn't make sense. Nothing about the location made conventional climbing sense. It wasn't the most sheltered spot, nor was it on the most direct path to the summit. It was a choice that seemed to be driven by a different logic altogether. Spurred by this thought, Ben called Josh's son, Ethan, back. He asked him again about his father's photography, about any specific artistic goals he had for the trip. "The light," Ethan said immediately, with certainty. It was always about the light. He had this theory. He'd been sketching it out for months. He believed that because of the way the southeast face curves, There was a 10-minute window just before sunset where the light would hit that specific section from the side, through a gap in the cathedral spires to the west. He said it would set the granite on fire. He called it the glow. He probably dragged David to that exact spot, a location that made no sense for climbing, just to get that one photograph. Suddenly, the illogical choice of campsite had a powerful, resonant reason. It wasn't about climbing strategy, it was about art. It was Josh, the visionary, chasing a fleeting moment of transcendent light, and David, the loyal friend and meticulous architect, building a safe platform in a difficult, illogical place to help him achieve his dream. The knowledge added another layer of deep poignancy to the tragedy. They had reached their perfect, hand-picked spot. They were exactly where they wanted to be. And then, they had vanished. The Yosar team was ready. The weather window was clear. The ascent to the ghost camp was about to begin, and with it, the slow, methodical climb toward a truth that had been kept for 12 silent years. Ben stood at the command post set up in El Capitan Meadow, a powerful telescope aimed at the almost invisible spot on the wall, and waited for the first radio report. From the climbers, he felt like an archaeologist about to open a long-lost tomb, knowing that whatever he found inside would speak of life, of ambition, of art, but also, inevitably, of death. The air in El Capitan Meadow was still and cool in the pre-dawn light. A thin layer of mist clung to the Merced River, muffling the sounds of the waking world. Ben Carter stood beside the Yosar command vehicle, a converted truck bristling with antennas and communications equipment. He held a pair of powerful binoculars. To his eyes, though the target of his attention was still cloaked in the deep shadows of the mountain's western face. Beside him, Liam, the Yosar lead, sipped coffee from a battered thermos, his gaze fixed on the same invisible point high above. The climbing team, led by Alex, had started their ascent hours earlier, moving in the dark to maximize their time. On the lower sections of the wall before the sun heated the granite. The team consisted of 4 climbers in 2 pairs. Alex and his partner, a quiet and efficient climber named Maya, were the lead pair, responsible for route finding and setting the ropes for the support team that followed. Their progress was slow, deliberate, a methodical crawl against the immense verticality of El Capitan. First check-in. A voice crackled over the radio, breaking the morning stillness. It was Alex, his breathing slightly labored, but his voice clear and calm. We're at the base of the main pitch sequence. Everything's going to plan. The rock is solid. Weather is clear. We're making good time. Liam keyed the microphone. Copy that, Alex. Maintain your pace. No heroics. Report in at every anchor point. This was the rhythm of the day, a slow drumbeat of progress marked by brief, professional radio calls. For Ben, it was a long, agonizing wait. He could do nothing but watch and trust in the skill of the team he had dispatched. He passed the time by rereading the transcripts from 1995, trying to immerse himself in the mindset of the original climbers. He studied the equipment list David Clark had so carefully compiled, comparing it to the gear Alex and his team were using. Much had changed in 12 years, with materials becoming lighter and stronger, but the fundamental principles of safety and redundancy remained the same. David's list was comprehensive, even by today's standards. It included backup ropes, a full rack of cams and nuts far exceeding what the route demanded, and a small but well-stocked first aid kit. The man had planned for every conceivable contingency, or so it seemed as the sun climbed higher. It began to illuminate the southeast face, chasing the shadows down into the valley. Through the powerful lens of the command post's telescope, Ben could now make out the 4 tiny figures of the climbers, impossibly small against the vast, textured canvas of the rock. They moved with a slow, balletic grace, a testament to years of training and an intimate understanding of the vertical world. He watched them for hours, his focus so intense that he felt a phantom ache in his own muscles. He followed them as they navigated dihedrals and traversed across exposed ledges, each movement a calculated expenditure of energy. The scale was deceptive. A section that looked like a short scramble through the telescope was, in reality, 100-foot pitch of strenuous, technical climbing. By midday, they had reached the halfway point, a large ledge system where they paused to rest and rehydrate. The mood at the command post was one of cautious optimism. The team was performing flawlessly, and the mountain was, for the moment, cooperating. During the break, Ben took a call from Sarah. She had been waiting by her phone all morning, her anxiety a palpable presence even through the phone line. Are they close? She asked, her voice tight. Ben described the team's progress, keeping his tone measured and reassuring. He told her about the professionalism of Alex and his team, about the careful, step-by-step nature of the operation. He didn't want to give her false hope, but he also wanted her to know that this was not a reckless endeavor. This was a methodical search for truth. We're taking every precaution, Sarah, he said. The goal is to understand what happened. We owe that to David and to Josh. She was silent for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer. Thank you, Ben, for not letting them be forgotten. Her words landed with a quiet weight, reinforcing the immense responsibility he felt resting on his shoulders. This was no longer just a cold case. It was a promise being kept. In the late afternoon, the climbers began the most difficult and dangerous phase of the ascent, the traverse into the alcove where the portaledge waited. From the command post, Ben had a clear, if distant, view of the operation. Alex, secured by Maya, had to leave the main ascent line and venture out onto a seemingly blank section of the wall. He moved horizontally, his body plastered against the rock, his fingers and toes searching for minuscule holds. It was a high-stakes, high-consequence maneuver. A fall here would result in a massive, uncontrolled pendulum swing across the face of the cliff. The radio went silent, the climbers maintaining strict communication discipline to avoid any distraction. Ben held his breath, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the control console. The minutes stretched into an eternity. He watched Alex slowly, painstakingly, inch his way across the void. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, Alex disappeared from view, slipping behind the curtain of rock that formed the edge of the alcove that a few moments later, his voice, strained but triumphant, came over the radio. I'm in. I have visual. On the portaledge. A collective sigh of relief went through the command post. Describe what you see, Alex, Ben said, his own voice hoarse. Just describe it. Don't touch anything yet. There was a long pause. Ben could hear the wind whistling in Alex's microphone, a lonely, high-altitude sound. When Alex spoke again, his tone was different. The professional climber's detachment was gone, replaced by something else, something somber and odd. It's a time capsule, he said softly. Everything is just as they left it. It's covered in a thick layer of dust, bird droppings, but it's all here. The fabric of the ledge is tattered, shredded by the wind, but the frame is intact. It's still solidly anchored to the wall. He paused again, and Ben could picture him taking in the scene, a place that had been sealed off from the world for 12 years. There's a sleeping bag, partially unzipped, and a book lying face down beside it. There's a camera on a small tripod, pointed out towards the valley. It's like they just stepped away for a moment. The words painted a ghostly, poignant picture, a scene of domesticity in the most extreme environment on Earth. The book, the sleeping bag, the camera, they were details that spoke of life, of routine, of a night spent suspended between the earth and the sky. Ben felt a profound sadness settle over him. He instructed Alex to begin the documentation process. Alex was equipped with a high-resolution digital camera and a head-mounted video camera, and he began to photograph the site from every conceivable angle, his movements slow and methodical as he floated at the edge of the platform, tethered by his ropes. He documented the anchor points, the condition of the ropes and carabiners still attached to the ledge, the placement of every single item. Each photograph was a clue, a piece of a puzzle that had been waiting for an interpreter. Maya soon traversed over to join him, and together they worked in near silence, communicating with hand signals, two professionals engaged in a delicate, almost forensic, task. The initial external assessment revealed several key details. The portaledge was anchored using 4 separate cams, just as David had sketched in his journal. This was a redundant, exceptionally secure setup. 3 of the 4 cams were perfectly seated in solid granite cracks, their placement textbook. However, Alex's initial report noted something strange about the 4th anchor, the one positioned at the far corner of the ledge. Command, the 4th cam looks off, he reported. From here, it looks like it's seated correctly, but there's a strange pattern of weathering around the rock it's in. It's different from the others. I can't get a clear look without disturbing it, but I'm documenting it extensively. This was the first hint of a potential anomaly, the first crack in the narrative of a flawless setup. Ben made a note, his mind racing with possibilities. Had a piece of equipment. Failed. It seemed unlikely, given David's meticulous nature, but not impossible. The climbers spent over an hour documenting the exterior of the camp before they were given the clearance to carefully transfer their weight onto the portaledge itself. Alex went first, testing the structural integrity of the frame with extreme caution. The old aluminum groaned under his weight, but held firm. Once he was securely on the platform, he could begin the close-up examination of the items left behind. The scene he described was one of quiet, frozen stillness. The sleeping bag was a high-end, Sub-Zero model. Inside, it was empty. The book. Lying beside it was a collection of poems by Rilke, its pages stiff and yellowed, warped by years of humidity and temperature cycles. A metal cup, half full of what had once been water or tea, sat near the edge of the platform, a fine layer of dust coating its surface. There was a small climbing pack, its pockets bulging. Alex, following Ben's instructions, did not open it. That would be a task for the investigative team back on the ground. The most poignant discovery was the camera. It was a high-end film camera, a model favored by professional landscape photographers in the mid-90s. It was mounted on a small, sturdy tripod, its lens aimed precisely at the gap in the western peaks that Ethan Brown had described. It was positioned to capture the glow. A remote shutter release cable snaked from the camera to the spot where the sleeping bag lay, suggesting Josh had been able to take photographs from the comfort of his bed. Alex carefully checked the camera body. "There's still film in it," he said, his voice hushed. "The counter says 24 exposures have been taken." A wave of excitement and trepidation washed over Ben. 12-year-old film was a long shot. It could be damaged, faded, or completely destroyed by time and the extreme temperature fluctuations on the cliff face. But if, by some miracle, those images were salvageable, they could be the last record of Josh Brown and David Clark's final hours. They might even hold a clue to what had happened. It was a fragile, tantalizing possibility as the sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting long shadows across the valley. The team's work on the ledge was nearing its end. They had documented everything, taken hundreds of photographs, and carefully bagged smaller items as evidence. The final task was to dismantle the camp itself. This was the most delicate part of the operation. They had to detach the portaledge from its anchors and carefully package the entire structure to be lowered to the base of the cliff for retrieval. This meant dealing with the anchors themselves. Alex moved to the first 3 anchor points, the ones that looked solid. He expertly removed the cams, finding them to be in remarkably good condition, a testament to the quality of the gear David and Josh had used. Then, he moved to the 4th anchor, the one he had noted earlier. As he got closer, he could see the problem more clearly. "Command, I'm at the 4th cam," he said, his voice tight with focus. "The rock around it, it's fractured. There's a network of fine, hairline cracks spreading out from the cam placement. It looks like a shatter pattern." This was a significant development. A cam placed in fractured rock would not hold under a heavy or sudden load. It would be like driving a nail into a rotten piece of wood. But why would a climber as experienced as David Clark place a critical anchor in compromised rock? It went against everything Ben had learned about him. "Is it possible he didn't see the cracks, Alex?" Ben asked, leaning into the microphone. "Could they have been invisible when he placed it?" "It's possible," Alex replied, his voice thoughtful. "These are microfractures. From a distance, this piece of granite looks bomber, totally solid. You wouldn't see the weakness unless you were right on top of it, inspecting it with a fine-tooth comb. And even then, if it was dusty, you might miss it." The image was chilling. David, working in the fading light of the evening, securing what he believed was a bomb-proof anchor, completely unaware of the invisible, fatal flaw hidden within the ancient stone. It was exactly the kind of scenario Sarah had described. Not a mistake born of carelessness, but something they couldn't have seen coming. With extreme care, Alex attached a separate safety line to the corner of the portaledge frame before attempting to remove the compromised cam. He gently worked the cam loose from the crack. As it came free, a small chunk of the surrounding rock, no bigger than his fist, crumbled and fell away, disintegrating into a shower of dust and pebbles that tumbled silently into the vast emptiness below. Alex let out a sharp breath. "The rock here is incredibly fragile," he reported. "It's like sugar glass." The cam was holding by a thread. Any significant shock load on this corner of the ledge, and this anchor would have failed. Catastrophically. The team worked for another hour, their headlamps cutting sharp circles of light in the gathering dusk as they carefully disassembled the tattered remains of the portaledge, packaged the frame and fabric, and prepared the evidence bags for the long, slow process of being lowered down the cliff face. As the last load was sent on its way, Alex took a final look at the now empty alcove. "The site is clear," he reported, his voice tired but professional. "It's just a bare ledge. Now, like we were never here." But they had been there, and they had retrieved the silent witnesses that, Ben hoped, would finally tell the story of what happened on that lonely, windswept night 12 years ago. The descent took the team most of the night. It was a slow, grueling process, abseiling down hundreds of feet of rope in the dark, their movements careful and deliberate. Ben and Liam remained at the command post, tracking their progress, their conversation sparse. The weight of the day's discoveries hung in the air between them. The fragile rock, the camera with film, still inside, the book of poetry. Each artifact was a piece of a story that was becoming both clearer and more tragic with every passing hour. By the time the first rays of dawn touched the highest peaks of the Sierras, the team was safely on the ground, exhausted but successful. The retrieved items, including the carefully packaged portaledge, the sealed evidence bags, and the precious camera, were loaded onto a truck and transported directly to the park's small, makeshift evidence room. Ben met the team at the ranger station. He looked at the faces of Alex and Maya, streaked with dirt and fatigue, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. They had performed a difficult, dangerous job with consummate professionalism. "You did good work up there," he said, his voice full of sincere appreciation. Alex just nodded, too tired to say much. "It was a strange place, Ben," he said, quietly. "Felt sacred, almost. I'm glad we were able to bring them home." Bringing them home. The phrase resonated with Ben. They hadn't found the men's bodies, but they had retrieved their last known location, the last place they had existed. In a way, they had brought a piece of them back from the void. Now, the second phase of the investigation would begin, the painstaking analysis of the evidence. The top priority was the camera. Ben knew that the film inside was their best, and perhaps only, chance of seeing the world through Josh Brown's eyes in his final moments. He contacted a specialist lab in Sacramento that had experience in recovering images from old and damaged film stock. He explained the situation, the age of the film, and the extreme conditions it had been subjected to. The lab technician was cautious, making no promises. 12 years on a cliff face is about the worst environment imaginable for film emulsion, the technician explained. "Heat, cold, humidity, it's a miracle it hasn't turned to dust. But we'll do everything we can. It will be a slow, delicate process." Ben arranged for the camera to be transported to the lab with the urgency of a medical specimen. As he watched the courier vehicle drive away, he felt a familiar sense of helplessness. So much of this case was now out of his hands, resting in the expertise of others. He turned his attention to the other artifacts. He laid out the contents of the climbing pack on a large, clean table. It contained what one would expect: spare layers of clothing, a headlamp with dead batteries, several high-energy food bars, and 2 one-liter water bottles. One of the bottles was full, the other was empty. There was also a small, waterproof pouch. Inside, Ben found David's wallet and Josh's wallet, placed together for safekeeping. And underneath them, a single, folded piece of paper. Ben's heart quickened. He carefully unfolded the creased, weathered paper. It was a note, written in David's neat, architectural script. But it wasn't a suicide note or a final goodbye. It was a route plan for the following day, their intended push to the summit. It detailed the pitches they would climb, the expected time it would take, and the planned descent route. The final line of the note read, "Summit by noon, back on the valley floor for beers by 6 p.m. JND." It was a note of pure, unadulterated optimism. It was the plan of 2 men who had absolutely no inkling that they were living their last day. They had settled in for the night on their portaledge, high on the successful completion of a challenging day's climb. with full confidence in their plans for the next. The discovery of the note made the mystery even more profound. Whatever had happened in that alcove had not been planned. It had been sudden, unexpected, and catastrophic. It had derailed their meticulous plan and sent them into the silent darkness from which they had never returned. Ben stood in the quiet evidence room, the note in his hand, the silence pressing in on him. The climbers had been alive and well, planning their future just hours, maybe even minutes, before disaster struck. The question was no longer just what had happened, but how. How could everything have gone so terribly wrong, so quickly, for two men who had prepared for everything? The answer, he suspected, lay in the compromised anchor and perhaps on the fragile strip of film making its way to a laboratory in Sacramento. The days that followed the recovery of the ghost camp were a crucible of excruciating patience. While the team at the forensics lab in Sacramento undertook the delicate, multi-stage process of trying to coax images from the 12-year-old film, Ben Carter immersed himself in the physical evidence they had retrieved from the cliff. The evidence room, a sterile, windowless space in the basement of the Yosemite Ranger Station, became his sanctuary and his obsession. He had the dismantled portaledge reassembled on the floor, a skeletal frame of aluminum and tattered nylon that looked like a wounded bird. He spent hours examining it, cross-referencing every strap, buckle, and seam with the detailed diagrams he'd found in David Clark's journal. It was a perfect match. The level of customization was impressive. David had reinforced the stitching at key stress points and added extra gear loops, modifications that spoke to his deep understanding of the equipment's limits. Working with Liam and Alex, Ben focused his attention on the 4 anchor points. They laid out the 3 solid cams on one table and the single, compromised cam on another, alongside the fragments of shattered rock that had crumbled away when Alex removed it. An expert in rock mechanics from the U.S. Geological Survey was brought in, a woman named Dr. Eris Thorne, whose specialty was granite fatigue. She examined the rock fragments under a microscope, her brow furrowed in concentration. This is a classic case of exfoliation weathering, but on a micro scale, she explained, pointing to a magnified image on a computer screen. See these parallel fractures? The outer layer of the granite in this specific spot was delaminating, probably due to millennia of freeze-thaw cycles. It created a sheet of rock that looked solid, but had no real structural integrity. It was like a veneer. So, Clark couldn't have known? Ben asked, the question vital to his understanding of the man. It's highly unlikely, Dr. Thorne confirmed. To the naked eye, even a trained one, it would have looked like a perfect placement. The crack was real, but the rock it was in was fundamentally unstable. He would have set the cam, it would have felt solid, and he would have had no reason to suspect otherwise. It was a geological booby trap, a 1 in a million spot of bad luck. The finding was a vindication of David's reputation. He hadn't been careless. He had been a victim of a geological anomaly so subtle it was effectively invisible. This discovery, however, only deepened the mystery. The failed anchor explained a potential point of failure, but it didn't explain what had actually happened. The portaledge hadn't fallen. It was still there. The men were not. Ben turned his focus to the human element once again. He sat down with Sarah and Ethan, separately at first, to walk them through the findings. He showed them the photographs of the camp, the book of poetry, the optimistic note planning for the summit. For both of them, the experience was profoundly emotional. Seeing the mundane details of their loved one's last known environment was both a comfort and a source of deep pain. It made them real again, not just figures in a faded memory. That was his favorite Rilke collection, Sarah whispered, tears welling in her eyes as she looked at the photo of the book. He read it to me on our first trip together. He said the poems understood the mountains. Ethan stared at the picture of the camera, aimed out at the valley. He got there, he said, his voice thick. He made it to the spot he dreamed of. I wish I could see the picture he took. That wish was the central hope of the entire investigation. Weeks crawled by. The lab in Sacramento sent periodic updates, each one a maddeningly vague report of stabilizing the emulsion or initiating a low-light chemical bath. Ben knew they were being as careful as possible, but the waiting was a form of torture. He filled the time by trying to construct a timeline. The last confirmed contact with the climbers was a brief, cheerful radio call to another climbing party on a nearby route on the afternoon of their second day. They had reported that they were establishing their camp for the night and that everything was A+. After that, silence. Based on the position of the sun and Josh's desire to capture the glow, Ben estimated they would have settled in for the night around 5 p.m. The final, optimistic note for the next day's climb must have been written sometime that evening. So, the catastrophic event had occurred sometime during the night, between the evening of the second day and the morning of the third. Finally, after nearly a month of agonizing anticipation, the call came from the lab. "We have something," the lead technician said, his voice laced with the weary pride of a difficult job done well. The film was badly degraded. The color is completely gone, and there's significant water damage and fogging on most of the frames. But we were able to salvage a few images. They're grainy, almost ghostly, but they are there. Ben felt a jolt of adrenaline that was almost painful. He arranged to drive to Sacramento immediately. He asked Sarah and Ethan if they wanted to be there when he viewed the images for the first time. After a brief hesitation, they both agreed. They needed to see this through to the end. The viewing took place in a small, darkened room at the lab. The technician projected the images onto a large screen. The first 20 or so frames were exactly what they expected, breathtaking, black and white landscapes of the ascent. They were classic Josh Brown compositions, full of dramatic angles and powerful contrasts between light and shadow. Even in their damaged, grainy state, the artistry was undeniable. They showed the two men working together, belaying each other, smiling at the camera from precarious perches. They were images of joy, of challenge, of life lived at its most intense. Sarah and Ethan watched in silence, their faces illuminated by the flickering images of the men they had lost. Then came the final sequence of images, the ones taken from the portal edge. The first few were of the sunset. The legendary glow was captured in haunting monochrome. The granite face lit up in a way that did, indeed, look transcendent. Josh had gotten his shot. Then came the final 3 exposures on the roll. The technician warned them that these were different. "The composition changes here," he said. "It looks like the camera was jostled. The focus is soft." The first of the final 3 images flashed on the screen. It was a blurry, chaotic shot, looking down from the portal edge. It was dark, clearly taken at night. The only illumination came from a headlamp, creating a bright, washed-out spot in the center of the frame. In the harsh glare of the light, you could just make out the edge of the portal edge platform and, below it, a dangling rope. Nothing else. The second image was similar, but the angle was sharper, aimed more directly downwards. Again there was the bright, overexposed glare of a headlamp beam cutting through the darkness. But this time, something was visible at the very end of the beam, at the edge of the frame. It was faint, indistinct, but it was there. A flash of color. A piece of fabric. The technician zoomed in, the image dissolving into a mess of grain. It was impossible to be certain what it was. Then came the final photograph. Exposure number 24. The last picture Josh Brown ever took. It was the most chaotic of all. The camera was tilted at a severe angle, as if it had been knocked over. The headlamp beam now pointed out into the empty blackness. But the image had captured one crucial detail. At the very corner of the frame, illuminated for a fraction of a second, was a hand. A single, human hand, fingers splayed, gripping the edge of the portal edge platform. It was a desperate, final grip. The image was a silent scream. And then, the screen went black. The roll was finished. The room was utterly silent, save for a soft sob from Sarah. Ben stared at the blank screen, his mind reeling. The photographs were not the solution he had hoped for. They were a new set of riddles, more terrifying than the old ones. They confirmed the event happened at night. They confirmed someone, or something, was below the ledge. And they confirmed a desperate struggle at the very end. But they didn't explain who was where, or why he spent the drive back to Yosemite in a state of deep, troubled thought. The haunting image of that hand burned into his mind. He had the facts, the invisible flaw in the rock, the optimistic note, the final, frantic photographs. He needed to put them together to build a narrative that could accommodate all of them. He sat in his office late into the night, the evidence. Photos spread across his desk, the reassembled portal edge standing like a silent sentinel in the corner. He tried to live the scene in his mind. Josh and David are in the portaledge. The sun has set. They've eaten. They've written their note. For the morning, they are settling in to sleep, suspended 2,000 feet in the air. What happens next? What could initiate a crisis in that confined space? He looked at the evidence list again. The 2 water bottles. One full, one empty. A mundane detail, but one that stuck with him. He imagined the scene. It's a windy night. A common occurrence on El Capitan. A loose item, a water bottle, perhaps, rolls towards the edge of the platform. A simple, everyday accident. One of them, let's say Josh, reaches for it, trying to stop it before it falls into the abyss. He leans out, maybe a little too far. He is clipped into his safety line, of course. Both men would have been clipped in at all times. But what if his safety line was anchored to the compromised cam? He leans out. There's a sudden gust of wind, and his weight shifts. The sudden, slight shock load is all it takes. The rotten rock gives way. The cam rips out, and Josh falls. He doesn't fall to his death, not immediately. He is still attached to the portaledge by his harness, but he is now dangling in the darkness below the platform, his full weight hanging from whatever part of his harness is still connected to the ledge. A terrifying, helpless position. In the tent, David is jolted awake by the sound of the anchor ripping, the lurch of the platform, and his friend's cry in the darkness. He scrambles to the edge. He shines his headlamp down. This is what the first 2 photos show. David, using his headlamp to try and see his friend, the camera somehow getting knocked and taking a picture. He sees Josh below him, alive but in a desperate situation. He is a dead weight, impossible to haul up by hand, especially with the awkward angle from the overhanging ledge. David is an architect, a planner. His mind would be racing, calculating the options. The correct procedure would be to set up a complex pulley system, a mechanical advantage to haul Josh up. But that would take time. It would require unpacking gear, setting new anchors in the dark, all while his friend is hanging in the void, potentially injured. David makes a choice. A choice not born of protocol, but of love and desperation. He decides on a faster, but far more dangerous, rescue. He will rappel down to his friend, secure him, and then they can work together on a solution. It is a decision made in a moment of extreme stress, a deviation from his own meticulous nature. He quickly sets up his rappel device on a separate rope. He begins to lower himself down. But the conditions are terrible. It's dark, it's windy, and he is rushing. A night rescue on an overhanging cliff face is one of the most dangerous maneuvers in climbing. He is focused entirely on his friend below. Perhaps his rope gets tangled. Perhaps he misjudges the distance. Or perhaps, in his haste, he makes a single, fatal error. He rappels off the end of his rope. Or he loses his grip while trying to transfer Josh's weight. He falls. Now, Josh is alone, still dangling below the ledge, having just witnessed his friend fall to his death while trying to save him. He is in shock, possibly hypothermic, and in an impossible position. He knows he cannot pull himself up. His only hope is to try and climb the rope. But his strength is fading. He makes one last, desperate attempt. He claws his way up the rope, inch by inch. He gets to the edge of the portaledge. He reaches up, his fingers searching for a hold. This is the moment of the final photograph. His hand, gripping the edge of the platform. It is his last, desperate act. But he has no strength left. His grip fails. And he, too, falls into the darkness, into the same silence that swallowed his friend. Ben sat back in his chair, a cold sweat on his forehead. The narrative was horrifying, but it fit every piece of evidence. It explained the ripped-out anchor. It explained the photos. It explained why both men were gone, but the ledge remained. It explained the sheer unluckiness of it all, a cascade of small, understandable events leading to an unthinkable catastrophe. It started with a geological flaw, a 1,000,000-to-1 chance. And it ended with a desperate act of friendship that became a double tragedy. It was not a story of carelessness, but a story of profound loyalty and terrible circumstance. A story that, in its own tragic way, honored the bond between the two men. The final step was the most difficult. Ben had to present this theory to Sarah and Ethan. He met them in the same quiet room at the ranger station where Sarah had first been interviewed 12 years ago. He laid out the evidence, piece by piece, and then, with as much compassion as he could muster, He walked them through the sequence of events he had reconstructed. He told them about the flawed rock, the likely fall of Josh, and the heroic, but ultimately fatal, rescue attempt by David. He described the final, desperate struggle captured in that last photograph. He made it clear that this was a theory, a reconstruction, but one that was supported by all the available facts. When he finished, the room was silent. Sarah was weeping softly, not with the pain of the unknown anymore, but with the sharp, clear pain of the truth. Ethan sat motionless, his face a mask of grief. "So David died trying to save him," Sarah said at last, her voice a whisper. "Yes," Ben said gently. "I believe he did. He would have," she said, a flicker of pained pride in her eyes. "He would never have left him." Ethan finally looked up, his eyes meeting Ben's. "And my dad, he fought to the very end." "Yes," Ben said. "He fought to the very end." It was a horrifying truth, but it was a truth they could hold. It was a story not of failure, but of a friendship that endured to the final, desperate moment. It replaced the tormenting void of the unknown with a narrative of courage and sacrifice. The mystery was solved. The case of the vanishing climbers was finally closed. But for Ben, the story wasn't quite over. He felt a deep, institutional responsibility. The discovery of the compromised rock on a popular climbing formation was a serious safety issue. In the following weeks, Ben worked with the Park Service and YOSAR to implement new protocols. They conducted a full geological survey of the most popular routes on El Capitan, using ground-penetrating radar and other advanced techniques to identify other areas of potential subsurface weakness. Several sections of rock, previously thought to be solid, were flagged and, in some cases, routes were slightly altered to avoid them. Warning signs were posted, and a new educational campaign was launched to inform climbers about the hidden dangers of microfractures and exfoliation. The tragedy of Josh Brown and David Clark, born from a hidden flaw in the rock, led to systemic changes that would undoubtedly save lives in the future. Their deaths, while tragic, had acquired a new, redemptive meaning. Several months later, on a clear autumn day, Ben accompanied Sarah and Ethan into El Capitan Meadow. They stood together at the base of the Great Wall, looking up at the spot, invisible to the naked eye, where the ghost camp had been. They held a small, private memorial. They didn't speak much. There was nothing left to say. The mountain that had taken so much from them now stood as a silent, majestic monument to the men they had loved. Sarah released a single white rose into the wind, watching it drift upwards on the thermal currents. Ethan quietly took a photograph of the cliff face with a small camera, a final, quiet tribute to his father's art. As they turned to leave, a sense of peace, fragile but real, seemed to settle over them. The open door that Sarah had lived with for so long was finally, gently, closed. Ben watched them go, feeling the profound weight of the last few months begin to lift. He had given them the truth, as brutal as it was. And in doing so, he had helped them find a path to a closure they had long thought impossible. He looked up one last time at the great, silent face of El Capitan. The mountain kept its secrets well, but sometimes, if you listened carefully enough, it would eventually tell its stories.